Welcome back. We're talking about the ongoing conflict in Syria. I'd like to pick up with one of our guests, Alexander Nekrassov, former Kremlin advisor, coming today from London. Just before the break, we were talking about the US not supporting the rebel factions. The US has also said, though, that if Russia and Assad win, that they could impose costs on Syria and Russia. And do you feel these are empty threats of an outgoing Obama administration, and really the US position internationally is being weakened by this conflict?
Two presidents in Washington, they're saying they're completely opposite things. It's for people in the Kremlin and in Moscow to really understand. On that point, that the Americans were not supporting rebels in Syria properly, I find this unjustifiable, because these rebels would not have lasted a day. These rebels were equipped enough to hold 275 people. Propaganda, or is it a fairy tale? The point of the Syrian conflict is that a lot of outside countries are meddling in this conflict. I'm not saying that, you know, it's just one-sided conflict. We have so many sides, it's confusing. But the problem is that it's more a war of the media outlets than it's a war, you know, where we know. Excuse me, if we are going to debate on such a level, then it's not a debate. That's a propaganda war. We are back to Libya, by the way, which was Libya was played exactly the same way.
It's only a propaganda war. There's no facts. That's classic Russian tactics. That's how Putin's in power in Moscow also. That's how you're Ukraine.
Excuse me.
How do you think Putin came to power?
In Libya, you
all
already,
those bombings in Chechnya, remember that?
Okay.
You know,
I understand you disagree. I understand, Shlomo, Alex, I understand you both disagree, and it's good, but we're getting slightly off point here. So to calm things down, I'm going to Wenping in Beijing, who's always a voice of reason. Let's step back a little bit. And what do you think the consequences of the rebels potentially losing in Syria is for the United States, both in the region of the Middle East and, of course, internationally as well?
I think now there are several developing trends happening in that region. First of all, we have seen the changes in the White House with this election of Mr. Trump, and according to his statements and his words about the Syria, and also he's going to develop a good relation with Russia, with President Putin. So I think there will be a policy change given by the White House in the coming year. So that will also help the Russian side and also the Syria, the Assad regime. That's for sure. Another thing is the war on the ground. For example, this Aleppo war. To take the Aleppo over by the Syrian government, it seems just a matter of the time. So with this retake of the Aleppo, of course, the Syrian government will further strengthen its regime power, and also that will gain strengthen its bargaining chips whenever there is to resume the negotiation talk. So that's also for sure. And then we see recently the Egypt even shifted its support very clearly to the Assad regime. So that's another, I think, help to the Syrian government. So we see very clearly nowadays there is, of course, this war in Syria is no longer just a war between the Syrian government and the anti-government forces. It's becoming a regional war, and also maybe we call it a proxy war. So a lot of big powers now get involved in. So now we see very clearly that is the Russian camp, and together with Iran, together now with Egypt, and I think even the Turkish relation with Russia also get something very interesting.
Yes.
They are closer and closer, but of course, to top down the Assad regime is still the big differences.
Mohamed Ali in Damascus, from where you're standing, does President Bashar al-Assad feel more confident, obviously, of Donald Trump becoming US president? And what would his continued hold on power mean for the region?
Well, regarding the Syrian government stance towards Donald Trump's policy, let's say the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad said it many times in two recent interviews he made with Western media outlets that it depends on the policy that will be implemented after Donald Trump gets into office, not depending on the statements that he makes during his electoral campaign, because according to the Syrian president, what he said is that the Syrian officials don't take the statements of the Americans seriously, because they always do contrary to what they say. And of course, also, if Donald Trump is serious about his policy that fighting ISIL is a priority, not toppling President Assad, and that he will be working with Russia. If Donald Trump is serious about this policy but implementing it, will he be able to implement it? This would also be a very important question according to President Bashar al-Assad, because there are a lot of political currents and parties inside the US that will not allow him, perhaps. Right. So we will still have to wait and see what will happen.
Shlomo, I want to bring you in. A Trump administration seemingly more pro-Kremlin, pro-Assad.
That's true, but on the flip side, also more anti-Iran. And remember that while it is true that each side is sending support. Saudi Arabia is sending support, they're sending supplies. And meanwhile, Iran is sending support, they're sending senior generals who die in conflict. They're not hiding it. Qasem Soleimani has gone to the very front lines. Akram al-Kabi of Harakat al-Nujaba has been on the front lines in Aleppo. There's never been any sort of a visit like that by a Saudi military official or a Turkish military official. What's the consequences of that with the Trump administration? While he's pro-Putin, he also has a lot of people who understand what the Iranian regime really is, that they're not, pro-peace, that they're not a force for stability in the region, that they're the #1 state sponsor of terror, which is what the State Department has called them, even under this administration. So it's quite possible that given the essential role of Iranian militias, Assad would be dead by now if it weren't for the Iranian militias. It's quite possible that Trump will push back.
I take your point about Iran intervening at a stage where a lot of people weren't and helping there. Alex, in London, do you see the Trump administration making an agreement with Moscow to bring this war to some sort of end and keep Assad in place in Damascus?
Well, unfortunately, we have to wait and see, because there's absolutely no point in discussing what is going to happen until we have two presidents, as I said, and Obama is doing, one thing, Trump is sort of hinting at another thing. We don't yet really know what his team will be about. So it's a wait-and-see situation. And it's quite a confusing situation, by the way. The only thing I think that we hopefully will see change is that China, which is never mentioned in Western reports as being in support of the Russian position, by the way. Have you noticed, everybody, how nobody mentions China when they talk about, voting in the Security Council and so on? I hope that China will start playing a more active role now, because it really, really needs its voice to be heard now. Because we always seem to think that it's only Russia in the Security Council against all the, civilized world. No, China is on the side of Russia. And I hope China will be more vocal on Syria and generally on the Middle East.
A point well taken. Final word, Wenping. Is China going to get more involved in conflicts like this, mediating or otherwise?
Well, as I mentioned before, China hasn't involved very much like sending military troops to join the fighting in Syria. That's not the things Chinese government has been doing, and I don't see the possibility for that trend either. But we have diplomatically we support Russia's stance, and we also work together with Russia to push forward those negotiations back on the track. But unfortunately, those negotiation process has been disrupted again and again and again. But I also mentioned China now becoming active in providing humanitarian help to the Syrian people. They suffered from those war. I think because different with Russia's approach, because Russia has been directly involved into the fighting in the Syria, but China, because we have the quite different background and quite different policy in terms of involved with foreign those war in those kind of way, direct way.
Okay.
And plus the distance you see is quite far away.
Yes, I wish we could talk more, but unfortunately we've run out of time. Wenping in Beijing, thank you very much. Alexander Nekrassov, of course, in London. Also, Mohamed Ali in Damascus and Shlomo Bolts here. Thank you so much.